everyone. Welcome to Healing Solidarity, Welcoming Change, the 2020 conference. I'm Swatee. I'm a member of the advisory circle and super excited for this conversation around international development to intentional change, creative practices for embodied futures. I'm super grateful to be having these conversations with two dear friends who I love dearly. We are missing two others that have been part of this conversation, but welcome them prioritizing their health in this pandemic and in this moment. So in this session, we're going to be looking at practices to consider the role of creative documentation and cultural production in our lives and across social justice and international development work. We're going to be working through discussion between each other, some reflection and sensory embodiment exercises, and going to be exploring a range of things, our connections between personal and cultural identities, understanding cultural production as a methodology that helps us relate to our work across social justice, cultural production and creative documentations as strategies for reflection and furthering movements. What do rituals or tools for unlearning of white dominant culture prevalent in development settings look like and feel like? And making connections between creative practice and examples of how cultural production can be used in development programming. During this session, we ask you to have a pen and paper handy. We'll also be sharing videos, songs, other pieces of pop culture that you're enjoying recently. So please take the time to find some of those when you hear the prompts. And we also are going to have a free writing session and a tea or coffee break during this session. So please have your mug and ingredients lined up as needed. So we just wanted to actually get grounded in this first session and give you a chance to welcome the other co-hosts to the session. So we'd love for all of us to share our name, a smell of childhood, a scent of your ancestor, and a meme, a video, sound, or a handle of our experience in social justice and organizing in this moment. So I'll pass to Radha first.
Hi, my name is Radha. The smell of childhood is a mango pickle, a sweet mango pickle. And the sense of an ancestor is the scent of this talcum powder that my grandmother used to wear, which had this very particular scent of lavender. And I'm going to upload my meme now. So I found this meme, I think about 2 months ago, and it really spoke to me. And I kind of shared it on Instagram. It was kind of heartening to see how many of my friends and colleagues were feeling the same in this weird, uncertain times. You know, the temporality of my mind just oscillates between I can do everything and seize the day, or like nothing matters. Yeah.
Love it.
Mine is much more cynical, but anyway, I'm Devi Leiper O'Malley, and I'm Cambodian American, but calling you from Morocco. I'm really pleased to be part of this conference that I've followed for a while. And my meme is something that Swatee introduced me to. It's actually a whole Twitter account that Swatee shared with me called Shit Nonprofits Say. I just thought it was hilarious when she shared it with me, because I'm incredibly guilty of saying a lot of these things. And I also feel I've totally been in that place where I enter a new organization and they're saying all these things and I'm like, wait, what do they mean? So I'm guilty of saying like impacts as a noun. We must align and shift and pivot, but also transcend. Also put things into buckets. I've been saying buckets a lot. And we don't write memos, we craft memos. And, you know, it just gets ridiculous. What are we talking about?
I love this one. I feel whenever I read it, anything from it, I feel really seen.
Yeah. Well, and I think this one is the one of the year, is now more than ever. 2020. Yeah.
I feel like that's in everybody's strategy statements at the moment. Yeah. And then Devi, a smell of your childhood and a scent of your ancestor.
So the smell of my childhood is the smell of mud and silt after a heavy rain and a hot afternoon, because we used to play, I used to love to play in the rain, and growing up in Cambodia, before the streets were paved, we would play outside in the street, and when the cars would go by, and then there would be a wave in the water, and it'd be like, yay! And I don't know how hygienic it was, but it definitely connected me to the world around me, and I think connects me to different generations, because I know my mom used to play in the rain on the street as well. And, you know, the streets still flood in Cambodia now that they are paved. You don't see kids playing as much in it, but you do still see them. So I felt like it was a nice connection across generation. The scent of my ancestor, I think I'll just keep the same. I didn't have grandparents growing up because of the history of Cambodia, but that's why I felt like it's still the same answer, because it connects across time.
Lovely. And I'm Swatee. I'm one of the advisory group members for Healing Solidarity. I'm based in London, of Indian heritage. A scent of my childhood, or a smell of my childhood, is actually really similar to yours, Devi. It's the sound of wet earth. Just after monsoon rains in India, and it's a really particular smell. Like there's nothing like it in the world, and it's like kind of sticky, sweet, humid, spicy. And there's something even now when you get off the plane in India, or you're even just walking through that like tunnel, like into the terminal, that the moment the airplane door opens, you can smell it when you get back home to India. And I love that smell. And actually the amount of little children who are going back for maybe the second time, like other diaspora children, that they also go, oh, it smells like India. And it's really like, it's a lovely shared memory that everyone getting off the plane, you can see everybody getting that same feeling by that smell, which I think is really powerful. So that's my scent of, or smell of childhood. And then my scent of an ancestor is actually my my nani ma, so my mum's mum, who's departed now, but she used to put amla oil in her hair mixed with like parachute coconut oil, and that kind of mix of the coconut oil smell and the amla oil smell, I've started putting amla in my hair like recently, and that smell really reminds me of my nani ma, and like how she would oil our hair or her hair and give us sort of massages, like hair malish in the evenings before we'd go to bed, and like plait our hair and things. So that's the scent of my childhood. And then I'm not sharing a meme, but I've been with Devi, actually have been just like really following different Instagram and TikTok kind of activism that's done by a lot of young activists, young feminist activists as well. And I've just like, there's one that Devi introduced me to actually called Climate Diva. And I'm just going to play you this video. Hopefully you can hear the sound. So what I love about it is that I've just been following in this rabbit hole of like the whole online activism. And I think it's just really interesting that young people are not sort of I think Devi and I have worked obviously within young people and girls activism and young feminist activism in our professional careers, and people might know us from Frida or With and For Girls, from sort of our past roles. And I think it's just watching the way that they are utilizing media at the moment as a way of digestible sharing of facts, of what's happening. I think as well, when you watch something like that, and particularly about the pipelines work, I think it's just interesting that those movements in particular, like the Dakota Access Pipeline, they were started by 13-year-old Indigenous activists. So very young children, one who I'm really grateful to know, Takata Ionized from the Shio Nation. And it just, for me, is this sort of embracing of like movements are so fluid and different people are sort of pushing themselves into movements, creating movements of their own or trying to find their place in it. And I love the fact that they're utilizing media that we have no idea really how to like do videos like that. And yet, you know, what's really interesting about those videos is we might think, oh, that's really fun or cool, and infantilize those actions a little bit. But actually, if you look behind it, those movements have been led and started by young girls and young feminists. They have changed legislations and laws because of it. And a lot of these kind of TikTok or Instagram activists also have started petitions, and just going into the rabbit hole, so many of them start with a video like that and they're like, sign my petition. And when you click on the petition link, they've got like hundreds of thousands of signatures. And I think it's just interesting that we don't recognize that within the development or social activist space. We don't see it as a mechanism. And so, yeah, I'm just really inspired by it. I've yet to do it myself, but yeah, it's definitely an inspiration of a different form of cultural production that's changing the scene at the moment.
Well, and I think it's a good, it does show in this time in 2020 with the pandemic. I think there was a tweet or somebody who said of like, well, who are the essential workers all of a sudden, or what are the essential things we care about? All of a sudden, it's the people who produce the food, it's the people who do art or things you can do at home. So art and music, everybody was rushing to culture to keep us, to feel a place of shelter, feel a place of security. And I think that this year has been exciting for what that has brought and the discussion it's allowed as well.
I also think that there's something quite amazing about young people like really adapting and utilizing and weaponizing these platforms. You know, if attention is the most important currency to go, then to just kind of, without overthinking it, getting out there and using that to create a community. It's quite incredible. And I mean, that's so much that I feel like I need to learn from them, because sometimes I feel like there's too much of marination in what's the right way to do it, that you kind of miss the time when you could actually just learn as you go.
I agree. There's also something really powerful about, even when we think about the title of this year's conference around welcoming change as well. I think that this has been a year of like lots of different changes. The COVID pandemic, the Black Lives Matters and racial injustice uprisings, emanating obviously from the US, but globally penetrating. And, you know, lots of other instabilities coming to head at the moment. And I think it has been really interesting to see the way that culture has played a role in connecting us and telling the stories of what's happening for us around the world. I would say actually more people are now looking to these kind of like cultural content producers as a way of digesting the information of what's happening and what's needed around the world, in a way that the purposes of mainstream media is not necessarily serving. And they're looking to those kind of content creators to recreate things in a different way. And I do think it almost like opens us up to a discussion on what does this mean for international development? Like, are we still stuck in in a space of very harmful practices within the development space, what are the ways that we want to be mindful of what's happening, but also just mindful of like the harm that's being perpetuated or continually created in social justice, and particularly in international development spaces as well.
I mean, I think the way I connect from the content creators and then going to international development, this year has also been, the content creation is also about how you are building community through a shared symbol or shared viral dance. And I think that when I think about us, just us three, and sadly with Steph who couldn't be here, but what I feel is bringing us a bit together is that we are rooted in these countries where international development has come to develop, India or Cambodia. And I mean, the other thing I would recognize is that, we come from different kinds of privilege, of class, of ethnicity or caste, and there's also a community I'm looking for of people who can, transcend, who have that privilege to transcend those different social boundaries as well as the geographic. And for me, that's how I feel like I grew up, because my father worked with the UN and my mother is an activist. And then I'm mixed. So I was always sort of trying to find my way between the two, and a lot of teenage angst and struggle in figuring that out. And some of the harmful things with that is just like not like being in between the cultures. And then the culture of international development is that there is so much turnover, right? I was always saying good. I was lucky that I was able to stay in Cambodia. I'm thankful for that now. But when I was growing up, I was always sad because like my friends whose families worked as diplomats or different agencies, they were always leaving. We were always saying goodbye. And I think that's a problem in international development too now, where it's, people are coming in usually on a higher salary or all these benefits, but then they leave. So how do they ensure something is left behind, or whose leadership are you really investing in, or whose lives are you really caring for? And yeah, there's this issue still of seeing, homes as the field, like going on a field mission. I was chatting with a friend of mine today, asking him like, what are still some of the annoying things you find about international development? And, he was saying that people still say that they're going on a field mission to Nairobi. And if you look at the skyline of Nairobi, it's hardly like a field or a place of hardship. You can't say that you can't talk like that anymore, I would say. And it's kind of an outdated way to speak about the world. But yeah, I mean, what are your guys' thoughts about some of these cultures?
I was going to say, I think like a lot of that resonates with me, and I think some of the really hard things that I've really struggled with in the international development space is, I think even just what we're looking for in terms of change and who gets to decide what change or what impact looks like. There are lots of different bodies that are like, we need to focus on evidence generation, we need log frames, we need an M&E structure that looks and feels in a certain way for us to showcase that the work that we have done as an international development agency or development agency has actually had the changes that we're looking to see. And so there's a lot of analysis of the problem, and then a creation of like steps, arbitrary steps sometimes, I would say, that are then created as a way of the theory of changes or log frames is like about taking an issue and then showing that actually specific steps led to change, and change is therefore measured in this way. And I think what I always struggle with that kind of framework is, well, it's not never really the local people and local communities who actually get to self-define what change looks like. It's that you're trying to fit your change into the box of a very white gaze on what development looks like. I do think that's really harmful, because everyone's always saying, well, we need more evidence, but then the evidence also sits in white-led institutions in the global north. You know, how often would a development agency take evidence that is generated as a form of cultural production or narratives from local communities, as opposed to, a report or an academic study that's been done by, an Ivy League or a red brick university in Europe or North America. And that also just, for me, is like a huge part of why we are so narrow in how we think about change. And it is really harmful, because people, as Devi was saying, you are bringing in experts to come into a country, and we all come from communities where there are these people who come on field missions to our countries, our places of heritage, and they get to define what we do, what change looks like. And even with the local communities, it's about fitting into a structure and a format. And even the way that we write reports it's always written, there's a few photos sprinkled in, but they're more done as like almost to, and No White Saviors says this a lot. It's also, it plays into the white gaze of development. It plays into the way that we want to be seen as, being the saviors, or white people see themselves as being the saviors of these places. And so photos are also taken and presented in a way that isn't often empowering for those local communities. It fits into that same box of like, look how unhappy these people were before, and then look at all these changes we created, and these are our statistics, and these are our pictures of happy faces at the end of the reports. And so there's just a really arbitrary, like harmful way that gets placed. And you see your, people that you work with who are from local communities also just internalize that over generations as well. And they start seeing change through that same gaze. And they also are, I guess like they have this tunnel vision to then not be able to kind of look broader beyond that, or to bring in some of their own practices, because there isn't value given to it in the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, so I don't come from a development background like you do. And I think of myself as someone adjacent to the social justice world. But increasingly, there's very little funding in the arts for practices which are creative but socially engaged. The ones which are commodified and can be sold still have some funding available to them. But for the work that I do, I'm increasingly having to apply for grants to the same international funding agencies. And it's always defeating, because there's a box and you have to fit your project into a box. And I have to already come up with success indicators, with the goal, with the vision, with, what would a 6-month check-in look like? What would the end of the year report look like? And this is for artwork. So it's so limited in its potential already. And then because I know that I'm competing with so many people, I start borrowing from that language. So we keep perpetuating the same thing. And sometimes it's kind of crazy, right? Because if I'm doing a year-long workshop with some women in a particular neighborhood, how can I neatly say whether its success was in the fact that 500 women participated in the beginning, there was only 100? Is that number really reflecting in a certain kind of shift? Or is that shift or impact or change palpable in other things? So I almost feel like there is a power to stories. And when you have many stories and many anecdotes, that is a kind of evidence which should be looked at and given equal importance, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, I think another part of the culture that I struggle with is like who's in control of time. And like you said, with the log frame or with like writing a grant proposal, like the timelines are all put on us. And I can easily get wrapped up into it and perpetuate this pressure to meet this timeline. And I feel like it connects to the problems, that the different cultural tensions as well, about like how people understand time. And then, you have to question, who's owning this time. And it kind of perpetuates this culture around who's working the hardest and who's staying up the latest, or who's the first on email, or who's the first in the office. And, this is across many different sectors and part of, our capitalist system, but it's definitely replicated in international development and this grind culture. And I think it allows us to even get more disembodied our work, and allows us to forget, the whole point of having time for relationships that are centered on care rather than relationships that are centered on transaction and what I need from you to do this, to give it to somebody else. I think we really need to push back on that. And I don't know if this is a good time, Swatee and Radha, should we have a coffee break that Swatee mentioned? We wanted to offer you this 10-minute break embedded in our talk, where we will invite you to do some free writing with us. We'll share some prompts on the screen, but for free writing is really just a sense to get you grounded, even in this conversation, what you're getting out of this, and remembering why you're here. That we also have we've curated a playlist for you, a welcoming change playlist that we will also invite you to participate on, and we'll give you information on how to do that later. So take your pen and paper. We're going to break for 10 minutes. Feel free to go to the bathroom or get water, whatever you need.
жібектен баутағар еді күмістен тұғырыңды жабар еді мойның ассар алтыннан алқа тағып қолға алып сылап сыйпап бағар едім салайын мен әнімде қара торғай қалада гүлдейді-ау қалада гүлдейді салайын мен әнімде қара торғай қалада гүлдейді-ау қалада гүлдейді айналу жаным
hope you all enjoyed listening to some of the songs on our playlist, that it's inspired you to maybe add some of your songs to the Healing Solidarity Welcoming Change playlist that you can come back to. And that the free writing exercise just gave you a little bit of a pause from that daily grind that Devi was talking about. You know, I'm sure you all feel the same, but I've been in those days where I've been on Zoom calls back to back, and I sometimes forget to eat, go to the bathroom, make myself a tea or coffee, and we rarely get the chance to really stop and reflect and resituate ourselves. So really grateful to our friend Stephanie Yawa De Wolfe, who sadly couldn't be with us on this call, but did envisage this exercise as an invitation to break free of the grind culture, and offer it as a ritual that you might want to think about in your everyday or in your work context, and with your teams, as a way of really thinking about situating yourselves, being really sensory in your surroundings, in your identities, as a way of really embodying what we're doing and why within the social justice work. So I've loved our discussion before the break, just around, I guess, the harmful practices that we're all used to seeing, both in social justice and international development. But as Radha, you said, a lot of those harmful practices also, just because of the state of funding, spilling into social justice and international development adjacent spaces. And you are, you know, very firmly situated within the art space as a well-known curator, and someone who's deeply embedded within the international and particularly the Indian art space. And I think what we've all really appreciated and loved from our conversations with you, Radha, is just around your thinking on cultural production and creative documentation. What are the things that it offers us to challenge and unlearn in international development? And do you have some examples in either development or non-development settings about how arts or cultural praxis can offer the international development space a chance to actually shift paradigms?
Thanks so much, Swati. It's been such a pleasure to actually talk to you guys, and it's kind of like kept me like excited and optimistic in otherwise somewhat grim times. I think for me, what's been super exciting, or what keeps getting reinforced when I see artwork that excites me, is that it's incredible power to move you, to the point that I've actually tried to study what is it that makes something so moving. And I think that there is this affectiveness to art, to food, to music, to a really good film, which is able to kind of shift something in you, in your perspective. Even, I would argue, sometimes make you question your most foundational and systemic of grudges and biases, because it's not speaking the language of fact and information. And I think that good artwork does that, and it does that with the power of storytelling. So there is something about narratives which is, I think, a really, really powerful tool for change. And I think good art employs that. I think the other thing that I find quite exciting about artists is that they have this kind of playfulness. Actually, a friend of mine called herself, like, she often thinks of her role as that of a jester, as someone who can ask difficult questions, as someone who doesn't have to take sides, who can play the devil whenever required, and kind of be curious. And I think what that does is that it allows you to ask different questions. And if you ask different questions, you arrive at different answers, which can totally change the way you look at the landscape. There are some incredible projects out there. I'll give you an example of this incredible artist, Jasmine Patheja, who has started an organization which is now a movement called Blank Noise, which began as a simple response to sexual harassment on the streets and now has grown into a community-led collective. And one of the things that they did was that she was also a alumni from the same college, and there are these kind of like badly lit, shady alleys, and they would typically be the places where you would get harassed. And what she did was that with a bunch of other participants, they set up tables over there with 2 chairs, and volunteers would sit over there and kind of actively invite passers-by to just come and have a conversation without an agenda, just to get to know each other. And it sounds like such a simple action to do, but it was so powerful because there is some shift in and distribution of power that happens in that moment, both ways. And the sheer unexpectedness of it led to some really incredible experiences for people. Another project that they do is called Meet to Sleep, where again, through Twitter or through Facebook, there's a call that is sent that, okay, in this particular city, in this park, we're all meeting on Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. Bring your pillows and your sheets. And women just come and just sleep in the park. And it's kind of like as an act to reclaim public space, but done in such a different way because it's not preaching, it's not talking about it, it's just doing it. I think those 2 are really, really amazing projects. I think another project that I'd like to bring from the methodology point of view is that of this artist called Tara Kelkin, who's been based out of Bangalore for a while. And she's been kind of researching and reflecting on labor, on physical labor in the times of digital companies. And so what happens to Uber drivers, to delivery guys, and other things like this. So what she did was that she actually collaborated with a few of them and took them to a local internet parlor. In India, we still have internet parlors because not everyone has access to a smart device or fast internet. And these parlors also double up as places where you can get basic Photoshop and typing done. So and actually we still use Corel Draw, we don't use Photoshop. So she collaborated with a few of these Uber drivers and with this guy in this internet parlor. And the Uber driver described to this gentleman what his imagination of the Uber executive's office is. And what does he think is in that office, and came up with these most incredible digital collages. And I think they were so telling of class, of economics, of caste politics, of trickle-down economics in ways that I don't think can be captured just by a simple report. And the thing is that these always have risks, right? Like if I was to like give Tara a grant, but almost demand her to kind of think through this entire project even before she's tried it, I don't know if she could do this. So I think it's almost like you facilitate someone to fail or fail faster or take that risk. But I think it's totally worth it.
I love them. I wish I could see those. Yeah, I mean, I think it also, for me, it makes me go back to this concept of time as well and who owns. It goes back to that feeling of ownership. And I think with, reporting for M&E, it's always reporting out there. And so cultural production and participating in art allows you to keep it grounded for the community, to show the results of your work to the community and for them to have an experience of it and to relate to it. So I think it offers so much more of an embodied experience. And then I think a greater impact, a longer legacy of the work that you've done for whatever project that, because I think, we all have good intentions with international development, but you have to remember that you have to always consider the impact that you have and the different ways you create that impact. And so, yeah, I think some of the examples that I was thinking about is, you know, different art groups that have started to come up in Cambodia, like Sasa Basak. Phnom Penh is like a fast changing city. So many of our buildings are being lost, our old buildings, and things change so fast. And one of the ways I think to preserve it is to ensure that there's art even happening within the buildings. Like one iconic one is the White Building, and making sure it was a place of showing art, of allowing the people who live there to produce art, and for people to connect with it so that they were able to like have a larger voice. Sadly, the building was still demolished, but it connects to, again, about another way of thinking about reporting and documentation is also about memory making. I think if you think about it in that way, it just feels more personal, and again, allows you to think about your legacy if you're someone who has to leave your current assignment. And it's something I've thought about with some of the work I've done at Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, where Ruby, my co-leader at the time, and all the staff at Frida, you know, we really did not want to just create report after report. So as much as we could, we tried to produce reports that we were proud of aesthetically, that it was a piece of art, that we always invited different voices into the report and to the review process, which was really hectic, but I think worth it in the end for everyone feeling like they were a part of it. One of the other exercises we did was to create a participatory timeline. I don't think it's functioning at the moment. I need to figure out how to get it back up, but it was, we invited many people to come tell the story of how Frida was created, because it grew so fast, and we wanted to honor the people that created it as well before we even came, and then invite people to submit other stories. So I think that's just like another example of understanding the memories that you make with the work that you're doing. It also lends itself to producing that kind of culture. Yeah.
What you're saying connects so beautifully for the exercise we just did, I think, because when we're living our lives, we're not just living them through words. But so much of our lives when we write, or especially for grant making, etc., end up only being articulated in words. That also comes with other complications of whether it's your first language, how well versed you are with it, how much can you jam into a neat 500 word limit. But that's not how you're living projects. So I think, especially with creative ways of documenting your own personal journeys, but also project journeys, allows for you to also make, or keep memories of other things that happened, which don't fit into these boxes. And I think that's a good practice to do without the agenda of like, oh, I can use it later. And you might be able to use it, but I think it's a good way to remember. I think it's quite powerful.
I would say as well, like going back to that whole process of like, what does an alternative M&E or kind of a success system in international development looks like? I think, you know, I've definitely seen as well just how different forms of cultural production, whether they be, you know, videos or soundscapes, provide like a different emotive connection for people who were there, who created something together or co-created something together, but they also impart a very different kind of personalized connection to your audience or who you're trying to tell. And so I just think back to with and for Girls, which I used to lead up until the beginning of this year. You know, we took a bunch of adolescent girls to Mexico City to that human rights funders meeting, and a bunch of adolescent girl activists from around the world, they designed their own session to end the human rights funders meeting conference, so in front of like hundreds of different donors from around the world. And you know, we obviously had to write reports as to what that session felt like, what happened in the session. But, you know, whenever I was sharing the process or what was produced with funders, with people who were interested in the session, and even actually with the UN Human Rights Commissioner, who ended up putting the demands from the girls on why it is now the time to lead girl-led movements. I shared with him and the office Michael Forst at the time, like the video that the girls wanted on the actual, like how they had put together the story or the narrative. And, you know, the girls' demands got into a UN human rights report as like the changes that we need to make within the human rights sector. And I don't think it would have had the same emotive connection and the same urgency in the call or the impassioned kind of embodiment on who these girls were if it had been told in kind of a bog standard question and answer, like box response report. It was because it was done in a creative way, and also it was co-created with the girls on how they wanted it to be presented afterwards for those that weren't there and able to be part of the actual literal experience or the physical experience, to be able to still build that emotional connection. And I think we sometimes forget that in our work, that we are looking for social change. We are trying to, you know, all of our mission statements in social justice or international development are about envisaging the world we want to see. And yet the world that we then present from that is very black and white, and it's in English, you know, in really A4 standardized reports. And the reality is that the world that we really want to see is colorful and creative and loving and compassionate and empathetic and connective and relational. And none of those things really get the same emotion when cultural production or creative documentation isn't really given the space or the creativity to be able to broaden or grow from that. So yeah, I would definitely, I think that Devi, the examples that you gave from Frida, I think everybody who knows Frida and has been, you know, admirers, onlookers, allies to that work, also just identifies Frida with doing things in a different way, and that there is a feel to it that is different from a lot of other feminist funding. And I think there's a lot of emulation, you know, that whole thing of what's the phrase? It's sort of imitation is the biggest form of flattery. Like, I think you can see lots of others within the space who have seen what was done in that space and have looked to emulate it in their own ways of producing and sharing reports and success, which I think is also a marker for how we need to reclaim what success looks like and what stories and voices and narratives need to be told within international development as well.
Yeah, and I imitated or borrowed from so many artists, and thankful for all of them that worked with us to create those things. And I think, you know, the process of creating them, I think I always really enjoyed working with designers and illustrators and understanding that process, and working with them to figure out how to beautify our work. It makes me remember a lot more of the work that we did, and it allows it to be celebration. And it allowed me to be a part of creating a culture. And, you know, I think that is sometimes hard with, you know, to name some of the people who work in international development, coming often from the global north. I think things are changing, but, you know, coming from the global north to the global south, and, you know, what culture are you bringing? And sometimes you even forget what culture you're bringing, or we haven't, I mean, with the current conversations as well today about, like, what is white culture? Is it anything? And what's good about it? And versus, like, I think Steph, sadly, she's not here, but she had a better analysis of this, but around, you know, when you opted into becoming white, you lost actually some of your historical culture. And so I do think inviting people to go back and also think about, you know, what culture you actually want to own and what you can bring from your past, and going back to the questions of, like, what what is the scent of your childhood, the scent of your ancestors, what is your legacy that you're carrying forward, I think also allows you to connect to this work too. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I think for me, one very important thing that connects two different spaces of cultural production and the social justice realm is also this thing of care, and how some of the creative documentation and other practices can offer us rituals of care, which kind of also, for me, I think that is a part of my culture. I think understanding that my culture is not something outside of me, which I've only inherited, but is something that I constantly make, accept and reject and live, has helped me kind of center myself and kind of find things that give me that kind of calm, which helps me then do my other work. And I was going to ask you actually, that do you guys have some rituals of care that you practice individually, at an institutional level, as friends?
Such a good question. So I meditate every morning, and that's one of my really key self-care practices that I have been doing for years. I'm very lucky. My mum's a yoga teacher, and very much embedded the need for having a daily meditative or something that was really rooted in self, and self as a connection to the divine or to the community or to the universe. And so I do feel that meditation on a daily basis is really important. And I think one of the things that I've actually shared with the Healing Solidarity Conference back in 2018 was also just at a team or at an organizational level, was just looking at what do we, you know, in Stars Foundation at the time, which is where I shared the example from, we started a methodology on taking our kind of group or our team, our organizational team kind of budgets or team development budget, and instilling a sort of a monthly Wellness Wednesday where everybody could kind of self-define a wellness activity that we as a team could do together. And it would rotate. Anyone could find a different practice or session or healer or activity, whatever that looked like, and could use the budget and schedule it in for a Wednesday once a month for us to do collectively. And I do think that, you know, we made sure that it happened even in the most busiest of times and that everyone cleared. And there was just something really powerful about being together as a ritual of care. But also, I think that did provide a springboard for us as a philanthropic foundation to think about, actually, this isn't just self-care for us, but if we need this so much to kind of go against that grind culture or that burnout culture that is sort of almost expected within working environments and working within the social justice space, because it's a bit like you can't take a break because you love your work so much and everything is really urgent, change is urgent. But it made us also then instill a self-care fund for all of our grantees. So it was also about noticing that it wasn't just us, it was really necessary within the space. And the feedback that we got was how important that piece of funding had been. It was almost like it was the unlocking factor for so many of those groups, was that they were able to reimagine their strategies. They were able to like take training on what a new fundraising plan or income generation plan could look like, because actually building in self-care time gave them space to reflect from. So I think those are just some of, I guess, the rituals, but also a self-ritual, but also a collective practice that others could maybe think about as well.
I think I'm still working on ritual and getting good at it. But I think, you know, in the virtual world right now, one cultural piece that I always loved is we always started every virtual call with a check-in question, and it was always fun to come up with something creative, but it allowed us again to relate to one another in a different way besides work. And to, again, especially the questions of like, what did you have for breakfast? Or, you know, what's outside your window, allows you to like reground yourself as to where you are in that moment and to share that with people across different countries and different time zones. So I think that I'll just offer that that's a ritual I really miss, and I always still try to do when I'm doing this work.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, like the playlist that we made in the morning, earlier in the session, I think something like that has also been like something that's been keeping me and my friends going. The COVID situation has been pretty bad, but I think being in India has had its own set of complications with it. And I think in May, there was like, the news was just so bleak that we were all like, I think as a group of friends, just low-key, very, very upset. And I think one of my friends suggested that let's come up with a playlist and we would all contribute one song a day. And I think it was just something so small, but it just kept us going, and it became a little thing that we really look forward to. And now we have this fantastic, I think 8 hours long playlist to kind of turn to. But yeah, I think that was something that was really nice. I think I also see the way people are relating to the internet. And I think, Swati, going back to what you said right in the beginning, it's quite amazing how TikTok, and I think even memes and the sharing of memes has allowed for a sense of community. And I think, at least for me, I feel like sometimes a meme articulates my feelings or what I feel about a certain political moment in so much, it's so much more neatly than I can ever do that. That I think those also become like really nice moments that, you know, that's what I wanted to say, or oh my God, that's totally what I feel. And it has a sense of humor to it sometimes, sometimes dark humor, but it allows again for that something positive, which is quite nice when the news and the presentation of news is so frightening.
Yeah.
100%. And so just, I guess, to wrap up our session, for those that have been joining us and watching along the way, I think it'd be lovely for us all to just think about what would we encourage the audience of the Healing Solidarity conference to do next. What could we also return to? I think we've had previous conversations also, again, thinking about change not being a space of being linear, but also of circularity or of a sense of regeneration. Change is constant. And, you know, the like, you know, Margaret Wheatley and several others also talk about this concept of emergence and borrowing from nature, in how regeneration is really actually a consistent form of what's happening all the time in nature, that change actually is constant. And so what are some of the things that we can think about doing next in our roles in international development or in social justice, that we can take from cultural production or creative documentation?
So my friends and I, we were discussing impact and its place in the kind of work that we do in the arts. And one of them, Shimona, said this really beautiful thing, that she thinks that we often have an imagination of change being linear, where you do this, then this happens, and boom, change happens. Whereas perhaps change is something that is more circular or spiral, which means that we have to kind of come back to the same place, but with a slight difference, and it keeps repeating itself, and it takes some time to be able to tangibly see it. And I think that's something that's really stayed with me, because it's also almost freed me from the pressure of imagining a fixed kind of outcome for it to qualify as change. And I think when I couple that with going back to moments in my life when I've felt something shift within me, where certain issues and certain positions that I take in my personal and political life I often find myself that those moments were not moments where I learned something new. It wasn't a function of not having the right kind of information. It was that something about that moment just made a very lasting impression on me. It was something that made me respond with empathy, and I think empathy has a very, very, very strong, powerful place in how change occurs and lasting change occurs. And I think the arts and creative practices, narratives and stories, um, I, I like to think they inherently bring some amount of empathy with them. And so I would like to I think what I would like everyone to do is probably take a moment to reflect on times in their lives when something has moved them, and see what was it about that moment or moments, and also maybe parallelly try to think about how they can perhaps experiment with more creative and perhaps intangible processes within their work, within their field work. What happens if you record an interview differently? What happens if you invite an illustrator to come and sketch out an interview as opposed to take photographs? Just small experiments to see what that changes in people.
I love that. Thank you.
I think for me, as someone who's also moved around a lot, is not necessarily at home, and has networks in a lot of places, it's easy to lose a sense of community. And I think over the past couple of years, I haven't had time for it. And while it's hard during the pandemic to find community when you can't go out as much, I would say offer, really making sure you're making the time for that at work, even if you're working virtually, like having those online coffees. And I think, for example, Swatee and I regularly share different pieces of art or cultural pieces that we're consuming or enjoying and experiencing. If we get our TikTok Reels game on. So I think it's, just really building in the time for the joy, and also like your squad, for whoever can make you feel confident and give you a sense of reality or a sense of self. And I think just talk. I think finding ways to just talk and using, I guess, like cultural production is a great way of doing so, and integrating that as a ritual is what I will say. And thank you for having me here and letting me be a part of this conversation. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'm thinking about ways to integrate it more into my work and my personal practice.
Thank you. So I think for me, one of the things that I would encourage folks in international development and social justice spaces to really think about is that at the moment, so many funders, development organizations, agencies are so taken with the power and the kind of pace of movements and the creativity and the fluidity, and also the kind of the welcoming nature of movements, that they are welcoming to very different sets of people that we don't necessarily see within international development. And I do think one of the things that I've learned most from observing and being within movements and funding spaces in movement space is the fact that they are very embracive of creative documentation and cultural practices as a way of pushing forward of keeping a welcoming nature to different people entering and exiting this space, but being able to leave their mark. And, you know, at the moment, there's a lot of co-option. A lot of people in international development are talking about themselves as organizers or movement builders, but are sort of leaving that whole space of actually what it really means to be in movement space. And movement space means documenting the current and the now, creating demands that are accessible to many people to be able to understand quickly and to be able to feel part of quickly. And when you look at a lot of movements, I think all of us can, an example that I love that I think so many people saw was, you know, the young feminists in Chile who created a dance, you know, a flash mob with a chant, El violador eres tú, the violator is you, outside of the kind of national government. And if you listen to the lyrics of that song translated into your language, and it has been done, you know, their political articulation of the problem, the change needed, and people's role within that was so well articulated into like a cultural form that transcended globally, that you saw so many other movements take that and move forward with it. And we need to ask ourselves why, you know, we're so taken by these ideas of social movements, but we're not necessarily interrogating that international development is so heavily framed within the white gaze and within white supremacy culture that we are still working within boxes, and we don't allow for cultural production or creative documentation to really enter our vernacular or enter the like a normal place within our workspaces. And to truly embrace moving forward, I think we really need to do that. So I hope for all of you this has provided some kind of space to kind of regather, to reorientate, and also to just question the changes that we might need to make, and looking at how we might need to borrow from, be inspired by cultural production, by content producers, by artists, by movement builders, as a way for truly welcoming and embodying change that's really needed in international development in this moment. So thank you all for joining us, and we really hope that you will continue to engage with this through adding your songs to our playlist. Thanks.